When Jim Murphy was elected leader of Scottish Labour last December, he inherited an unhappy party in deep decline. His predecessor, Joanne Lamont, complained that Scottish Labour was treated by her Westminster colleagues as like a branch office of London. And in Scotland, Labour was polling terribly, scoring just 23 to the SNP's 52%. So what's changed? Well, first, Mr Murphy vowed that he didn't need permission from anyone, including Labour leader Ed Miliband, about decisions he took in Scotland. He then promised to spend proceeds from a mansion tax, which largely falls on London, on nurses in Scotland, and this week vowed to block fracking north of the border. He also wants to rewrite Clause 4, sound familiar, in Scottish Labour's constitution to emphasise its focus on Scotland. But is all that enough to turn the tide against the SNP surge, or has Labour lost its Scottish fiefdom forever? And Jim Murphy joins us now from our Glasgow studio. Jim Murphy, we meet again twice in 1 week. You can't have too much of a good thing. Let me get straight to it. We haven't got much time. Let's begin with the TV debates. They were reconfigured during the week. Is it right that Mr Miliband should be debating twice with Nicola Sturgeon on the UK stage, even though she's not even standing for Westminster?
The Labour Party has made it clear that this is an issue for the broadcasters. Whoever the broadcasters want to invite, that's up to them, and the Labour Party will take part. If it gets any bigger, it'll be more like an episode of 15 to 1 than a debate for a Prime Minister.
You don't mind it will be Nicola Sturgeon on the UK stage twice against your leader?
Look, it's for the broadcasters to decide. I'm open-minded about it. I'm looking forward to debating Nicola Sturgeon, of course, here in Scotland as well, because there's big decisions and a lot of votes to be cast here in Scotland.
Your deputy in Scotland, Kezia Dugdale, she said that she would have no qualms whatsoever, her words, if Labour went into partnership with the SNP after the May election. Do you?
I think it's important that parties work together. It happens all across Scotland in local authorities. But what Kez is talking about is the same thing that I've been talking about, which is that we're not expecting, we're not planning, we don't want, and we don't need a coalition with the SNP. The fact is that come the UK election here in Scotland in May, it's really a choice of whether David Cameron hangs on to power or whether we can get David Cameron out of Downing Street. And by voting SNP, unfortunately, a lot of Scots, if they do so, run the risk that by accident they ensure that David Cameron holds on to power.
Well, because that may be what the Nationalists want, because they'll then be able to say that Scotland hasn't voted for it. But you talk about the election. Last October, an Ipsos Mori STV poll gave the SNP 52%, Labour 23%. Many dismissed this as a flash in the pan. Last week, the same poll gave pretty much the same result. Why is Scottish Labour 20 points behind the Nationalists?
Well, the Scottish Labour Party hasn't been good enough in the recent past, and we've said that we're under new management and new leadership. We are changing Clause 4 to ensure that all of the decisions that affect Scotland and the Scottish Parliament will be decided here in Scotland. The new policies on ScotRail, on fracking, on funding the NHS. And really what we're doing, rather than the UK government and the Scottish government continuing to argue with one another about powers, the Scottish Labour Party uniquely is saying, what we'll do with those powers.
All right, well,
so the other parties are fascinated by last year's disagreement on the referendum. That's in the past.
Okay, well,
this year's decision is about the election and whether David Cameron hangs on to power.
I mean, you're keen to dispel the idea that Scottish Labour is a branch office of the Labour Party in Westminster. So give us 3 areas, major areas, where Scottish Labour policy will be different from Westminster Labour policy.
Well, I'm not just determined to demonstrate it, I'm determined to make sure it's absolutely the case.
So give us 3 areas.
And I will do, but if it was ever the case in the past that Scotland was a branch office of the UK Labour Party, that's gone and it's gone for good.
So give us 3 areas.
3 areas are just today: fixed odd betting terminals, which is a real problem in many working class communities, on the railway industry, not-for-profit railway industry, is crucially important, and what we've said in fracking is distinct and different. So, Andrew, you asked me for 3 areas. I've given you 3.
Well, let me go through.
Andrew,
let me go through.
I'll happily do that. But Andrew, I'll happily do that.
No, you've given me 3, and I want to interrogate each one.
I look forward to that. But
so
that's
I just asked for 3.
Just in one. 3 just in one day that we've announced.
So let me. I mean, you've ruled out fracking in Scotland, quote, until environmental and health safeguards are in place. That's London Labour policy too.
Well, the fact is, I announced 3 in just one day today.
Well, but there's no difference there.
On fracking, it's important that we learn from what happened in the United States, but also what we learned and what happened in Poland and Ukraine. There are different experiences.
In what way is it different from London Labour?
And what would be different is we would give local people across Scotland the right of veto. Any proposal on fracking, yes, you would have to meet the UK criteria and the 13 tests that will be debated in the House of Commons tomorrow, but we would also say to local communities in Dumfries and Falkirk and all across Scotland, if you have concerns, we will put it to a local referendum, and local people have their say. Communities shouldn't be used as a testing ground on science that has yet not been proven, and environmental concerns still exist. That's pretty clear, Andrew, and I hope you accept that's a pretty straightforward answer.
It doesn't seem to me to be that different from London Labour, but let me ask...
No, Andrew, stop a minute, because I know that's the interview you want to have.
No,
please accept,
people will make up their
Andrew,
minds, not what I think.
Andrew, please accept that's a significant difference.
All right, well, you're saying it is, so and people can decide for themselves. Here's one area where you could be different. Most Labour activists in Scotland want to scrap Trident. Why don't you take that position? That would differentiate you big time from London.
It would differentiate us, but it would be wrong.
It would be wrong.
The fact is that you'd make a decision on the nuclear deterrent, not about playing footsie about possible coalitions with other parties and all that sort of stuff. The things about the nuclear deterrent aren't about negotiations with other parties on hypothetical coalitions in the House of Commons. It's about negotiation with other nuclear states to ensure that the world is nuclear free. The nuclear deterrent is too important to get involved in that sort of horse trading on the nation's safety. I want a world free of nuclear weapons. Sure. You should negotiate that away with other nuclear powers, not negotiate away for partisan gain.
Very interested in that. So for you, Trident is non-negotiable with the SNP?
Look, I'm not looking for negotiations at all. I don't think we'll need negotiations.
No, but if you ever found yourself in that position, would Trident be non-negotiable?
I know you're going to get frustrated by this answer, Andrew. It's the answer that all the politicians give. Of any politician that expects its party to form the next UK government will give this answer. We're not getting involved in a debate or negotiations about what happens if we lose the election. Yeah. We're determined to win. And nothing in life, even the polls that currently are in Scotland, where we are behind, I'm not contemplating defeat. I'm not contemplating coming second. Because coming second in Scotland is coming last, and we're determined that doesn't happen.
Let's finish on your own future. Can you clarify for our viewers, are you definitely standing for Westminster in May?
Well, I'm the candidate for the UK election in East Renfrewshire, of course, in May. I have been for nearly 2 years. If that's going to change, then of course I'll tell my constituents first, some of whom, of course, will be... Some of whom,
it's 100 days to the election. It's 100 days. Can you not tell us categorically, yes or no, are you standing for Westminster in May?
Some of my constituents will have the good judgment to be watching your programme, but not all of them. I'll tell my constituents if the situation changes in terms of me being a candidate for the UK election in May. My commitment is I'm going to be Labour's candidate for First Minister in 2016 for the Scottish Parliament. I'm determined that we build a Scottish Labour Party that's successful, proud and patriotic, that stands up for Scotland.
Fine.
And I'll do that as the candidate
this
to
is
be
an
First Minister in 2016.
important point. The people of East Renfrewshire have a right to know, as does the rest of Scotland. Is there a possibility you may not stand on May the 7th for East Renfrewshire?
You are right, Andrew. The people of East Renfrewshire have a right to know, and I'll tell them first rather than through the broadcast.
Well, I think people will find it remarkable that with 100 days to go you cannot be categorical. But let me ask you one more question. If you become an MSP in Holyrood, do you rule out being both an MP and an MSP?
Look, if I'm First Minister of Scotland, I wouldn't want to be an MSP and an MP, but I'll make decisions. But
if you weren't,
I'll make decisions about these things. And again, Andrew, it's a boring answer to a predictable question, which is I'll tell my constituents first about these things.
All right, we'll leave it there.